This was the real-life Squid Game, and it's really horrifying. In 1953, in the small town of Ash Grove, Indiana, a man named Samuel Griggs lived on the edge of the woods. He was quiet, kind, and loved teaching kids games like hide and seek. One summer night, 3 teenagers, Danny, Rose, and Frank, went into the woods to meet Samuel for a game. They never came back. The next day, Sheriff Holt went looking for them. Deep in the forest, he found an old clearing. 3 wooden crosses stood there with the teens' names carved on them. Nearby, he saw an old cabin. Inside, Samuel was sitting at a table, playing with marbles. When the sheriff asked about the kids, Samuel smiled and said, "They played my game, but they lost." On the walls of the cabin were hundreds of names written in black ink. Samuel leaned forward and whispered, "Want to play too, Sheriff? The rules are simple. Win and you leave, lose and you stay forever." When the sheriff came back the next day with other officers, the cabin was gone. Some say Samuel still lives in the woods, calling out to anyone who dares to play his game. And if you hear him, don't answer. If you lose, you won't come back.
둥글게 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 빙글빙글 돌아가며 춤을 춥시다. 손뼉을 치면서 노래를 부르며 랄랄라 즐겁게 춤추자.
On an early morning in 2012, Anthony Hensley set out to do his routine job. He was a husband, father of 2, and caretaker for a local property, and he was tasked with managing the swans on a quiet lake in Illinois. But this peaceful scene would soon take a dark and unexpected turn. As Anthony neared, one swan became very territorial. These creatures may seem elegant, but when provoked, they are capable of fierce aggression. The swan then attacked Anthony with violent precision, slamming its wings into his chest and face. Its sharp beak tore at his exposed skin, leaving jagged wounds that oozed blood into the water. Also, the swan struck his kayak repeatedly with its beak and wings. The relentless assault caused Anthony's kayak to overturn. Trapped in the freezing water, he struggled to stay afloat. And the swan didn't stop. It continued to attack. It lunged at Anthony's face, its sharp beak grazing his eye and ripping his lips. Blood stained the water as the vicious bird drove him further into panic and exhaustion, keeping Anthony away from safety. Despite being an experienced swimmer, the weight of his waterlogged clothes and the swan's relentless aggression made escape impossible. By the time help arrived, it was too late. Anthony Hensley, just 37 years old, died, leaving behind a wife and 2 daughters, his life tragically claimed by nature's wrath.
This is one of the most interesting ways a killer has ever been caught. Everything was going just fine in the life of John List, married man of over 20 years, 3 children, a big old mansion. But one day in 1971, he was let go from his longtime accounting job. List was pissed. But even before the firing, there were some things that were kind of subtly brewing in the background. List was a deeply religious man, and let's just say his kids were starting to get a little bit older, and they were kind of slowly starting to release that grip on the Lord. And on top of that, his daughter wanted to pursue a career in Hollywood, and he just thought that shit was the devil. So as he watched the image of what he saw as the ideal family slowly start to change, and bills weren't getting paid at the mansion, hell, his own mother who lived upstairs, he was skimming money out of her bank account. As the ship was sinking, he devised a plan, the reset button. One December day, police were called to the List home. Now, the Lists were kind of reclusive in general, but when lights that had been left on for over a month started burning out, there was just no sign of movement at all in that home. Neighbors started getting suspicious. When police entered the home, they discovered the entire family unalived, wrapped in sleeping bags in the living room. The only person missing from the equation was Father John. But there was a note, a mini manifesto written by John, just explaining why he just had to do what he did. And after that, there was nothing. No leads, fizzled right the hell out. By the time 18 years had passed, there was still zip, but detectives decided to try and throw something at the wall, so they got a hold of America's Most Wanted and asked them if they could just cover the List case, and they did. And as part of that new effort, they enlisted a forensic sculptor to help sculpt what List could possibly look like. The sculptor looked at old photos of List's father as well as studied personality traits that could actually help him determine the progression of certain facial features. Motherfucking stress gels. And it wasn't long before a woman called the tip line to say, "That's my old neighbor, Bob Clark." When investigators were quickly able to locate and catch up with Bob, he was married, worked as an accountant, and was deeply devoted to his Lutheran church. And look at that. Right down to the glasses and the stress gels.
Nothing scares me more than when someone goes missing and obviously foul play was involved, but over time, disturbing proof is found that they could still be out there somewhere alive. In this case, a little girl gets abducted from her home in the middle of the night. After multiple sightings of her with unknown people, 911 would receive a frantic phone call a year later claiming to be this little girl. She would scream for help, and a man would be heard yelling at her in the background before the line goes dead. This is what happened to 9-year-old Antoinette Cayadito, and that last phone call from her will forever haunt me. In the early morning hours of April 6, 1986, Antoinette would be woken up by a knock on her front door. She lived with her mom Penny and her two sisters Wendy and Sadie in Gallup, New Mexico. Antoinette was described as wise beyond her years. She loved school and Bible studies, and being the oldest, she loved taking care of her two little sisters. So when the knock woke her up that fateful morning, she opened the door, and after doing so, she mysteriously disappeared. That night, Penny was out having fun at a local bar, and all three girls were at home with a babysitter. She got home around midnight, sent the babysitter home, and then went to bed. According to Penny, when she woke up at 7 the next morning to get the girls ready for Bible school, Antoinette was nowhere to be found. After searching everywhere she could think of and talking to all of the neighbors, Penny reported her missing to the Gallup Police Department. I know this was a different time, but it took police 4 days just to officially search Antoinette's home, which is crazy considering the fact that a little girl's life was on the line. Authorities began searching the entire neighborhood, but no trace of Antoinette was found, and it was literally like she vanished into thin air. While police were at the home, a family member brought up a man named Emiliano who went by Emo. It was only then that Penny told police that in the days leading up to Antoinette's disappearance, Emo gave her flowers on 3 separate occasions. From what I can find, Emo wasn't a complete stranger to the family though. Penny's best friend was named Ronald, and I guess Ronald introduced Emo to the family. Not long after this introduction, the two would frequent Antoinette's house and often give.
Behind me is a real photo of Jerry Nave. He had his face blown off with a shotgun at a bus stop. He was on LA's Skid Row while he was waiting for the bus, and next thing you knew, he woke up 4 months later in a coma with the right side of his face blown off. The doctors performed a 22-hour operation on him to try to restore his facial structure. This happened in 1998. He was working as a machinist, and all he was doing was waiting for the bus to go home. The doctors said it was a miracle he even survived this, and he was shot at point-blank range. However, if he wasn't shot at point-blank range, his head might have come off. After the incident, he lost contact with most of society, including his own family. All of the doors really closed on him after that. He can't even breathe through his nose properly. He can't smell. He can't taste. Because of his other eye being blown off, he can barely read. He can see through his left eye, but it's pretty blurry. Jerry Nave did pass in November of 2020. It was said there was someone looking for him, possibly his brother, but he just did not want to contact anybody. And the sad thing about this is that they never found his shooter, so this person is probably still out there, and this is probably not their first violent act. But Jerry was a pretty pure soul. He said, "I forgive them." That is such an insane thing to forgive someone after blowing off half of your face. Jerry was obviously known as a very sweet person, of course, as you can tell by the story, and it's just sad that life ended like this for him. Now, if you look up Jerry Nave, there's many interviews with him, and I honestly urge you to go look at them because he's such a pure person. Very sincere, very kind. If you Google him, anyone on the internet that's interacted with him says he's so nice. Let me know your thoughts about Jerry.
Child marriage used to be legal in America, and the story of this marriage is one of the most disturbing things I've ever read about. This is 9-year-old Eunice Winstead, and this is her legal husband at the time, Charlie Johns. So on January 19th, 1937, Eunice, who was 9 years old at the time, left her mother's house. On that morning, she told her parents that she was going out to buy herself a new doll. But instead, the 9-year-old was headed to the courthouse to meet her 22-year-old future husband, Charlie Johns. So at the time of this affair, there was no age limit on marriage in Tennessee. I mean, technically, someone could have married an adult and a baby if they paid off the minister and got everything to go through properly. And so on that day, 22-year-old Charlie offered a local Baptist preacher named Walter $1, which equates to around $21 today. and the preacher accepted the offer, came into the church, and married the 9-year-old to the 22-year-old. I mean, obviously, words cannot possibly describe how disturbing images like these are. Now, at first, both Charlie and Eunice's parents disapproved of the marriage, but after some thought, they eventually approved the marriage, and they just allowed them to live together and be married. Now, sadly, Eunice dropped out of school at the age of 9 after her husband, Charlie, pulled her out, and she began giving birth to their children at age 15. They'd eventually have 8 children together. I just cannot believe that shit like this used to happen in America. Comment your thoughts on this below.
There are so many twists and turns in this murder case, I'm really interested as to whether you can guess who the killer was before I reveal it at the end. It was 2009 when 26-year-old Saima Khan and her 18-year-old sister Saba, their 2 brothers and their parents moved to Luton. To absolutely everyone that they met, the family seemed lovely. They were kind, considerate and really hard-working. They had a great work ethic. Saima and Saba both had jobs as care workers and seemed very family-orientated. Saba described her and her sister's relationship as the pair being completely inseparable. She said it was like they were one person in 2 separate bodies. In 2011, Saima got married to Hafiz Rehman and he moved into the family home. They would end up having 4 kids and seemingly had this perfect family unit. That was until tragedy struck. On the 23rd of May 2016, Saima headed out to work. She left her sister Saba looking after the kids as usual in the house. Saima was spotted on CCTV just after 11 PM that day, arriving back at the property. She entered her home after her shift but was ambushed in the hall and stabbed to death. She was so brutally attacked that her head nearly came off. Now, neighbours described hearing the commotion and they said that they could hear blood-curdling screams. They obviously rang police and officers raced to the scene to find Saba distressed, telling them how she was upstairs in the shower and then came down to see her sister brutally killed. Officers entered the property and they found that the back door had been smashed in. The glass was all over the floor. Police wondered if this was a burglary gone wrong, and locals were obviously really concerned about a killer just being on the loose in the area. However, there didn't seem to really be a motive for this killing. It didn't look like a burglary because nothing had been taken from the house. The viciousness of the attack also suggested a crime of passion. Saba was questioned by the investigators to obviously get a little bit of a better idea of whether Saima had any enemies around. She then dropped a bombshell. She told them that Saima had been having an affair behind her husband's back. Well, this obviously completely changed the focus. Now we're kind of expecting maybe this is her lover that's killed her, or maybe it's her husband. They decided to look on the family computer for kind of more clues, were there any clues indicating that the husband knew about this extramarital affair? However, what they found on the family computer again shifted the focus completely. It was actually the husband, Hafiz, that was having the affair, not Saima. They did some digging through the messages that he'd been sending and found out who he was having the affair with. It was Saima's sister, Saba. Saba had also got some incredibly disturbing searches on her phone relating to poisonous snakes and other methods to unalive somebody that nobody would find out. She'd also seemingly looked online at how she could hire a hitman. Police decided to search Saba's bedroom and see if they could find any physical evidence to link her to the murder. That's when they found a plastic bag full of bloodstained clothing and the murder weapon. It transpired that on the evening Saima was killed, she'd got a text of Saba telling her something was wrong and to come home ASAP. Her sister had lured her home after her shift to do the unthinkable with the children upstairs. Finally, Saba was arrested and charged for killing her sister. She would plead guilty and was jailed for 22 years.
He has been arrested 87 times. I don't know why this guy is not in prison. This is Jamar Banks. He's 52 years old and he has 87 prior arrests. He is now wanting for 2 stabbings that happened on January 1st and January 2nd. And this obviously is not his first rodeo. He is known as the New York subway stabber. He frequents the number 2 and the number 5 subway lines. For the 2 stabbings, apparently he stabbed a guy in the back after arguing with him and then ran away. And then he stabbed an MTA cleaner in the armpit and the back and ran away after that too. Now luckily, both of these people are in stable condition and they were taken to the hospital, but this dude has a ton of prior charges: assault, attempted murder, criminal trespassing, turnstile jumping, you name it. One time, he hopped out of McDonald's to assault somebody because they just knocked on the door to see if it was occupied. And then another time, he shot at some guy because he bumped into him by accident. They do cite that he has a prior mental illness. However, to have this person loose on the streets like this is just outright dangerous for everybody around him. Like, get this guy the help he needs and then put him back, but not putting him in prison or a mental health institution is literally just causing a bunch of random New Yorkers to get stabbed. While the police look for him, they put out an extreme caution warning that he is extremely volatile and dangerous and carries a large knife with him. So if you're in New York and you see him, honestly, just stay away. Do you guys think this guy should be in prison? What do you think should happen to him?
Be careful who you game with, because they might just become obsessed with you. Board a flight to your hometown, arrive at your doorstep with a box of knives, handcuffs, and duct tape. So this Canadian pipsqueak, Devin, he's been gaming it up with this woman from California for years. They've never met in person or anything, just talk through the little headset. But something happens. Devin becomes obsessed, like really obsessed. Only problem is, gamer girl's got a boyfriend. Now, I don't know what set him off. Perhaps there was a, whoa, I don't like you like that, Devinator 2000. But nevertheless, Devin devises a plan. He gets a hold of his good pal Darius, also Canadian, and they fly from Vancouver, BC to California. Now, apparently, Devin knew exactly where this woman was, and when he touched down in Monterey County, California, he studied this woman for days, watched her patterns, watched her come and go from her home, go to work, just everything. Then, posing as an Amazon delivery driver, package in hand, Devin rings the doorbell. The only problem was, it wasn't the woman who answered the door, it was her boyfriend. That's when Devin immediately pushes his way in, comes at this guy with a knife. As he's swiping away at this guy, causing critical injuries, Devin's online crush, the woman, runs up behind with, quote, a sharp metal object. They haven't confirmed what it was. And I know you're wondering how Devin ended up looking so pretty in the mugshot while she started wailing away on him. Devin then starts attacking her, and through all this mayhem, he drops the box he was carrying. Apparently, he was holding the box throughout the entire attack. And out flies more knives, duct tape, and a pair of handcuffs. Clearly was planning something more than just botching this, doorway attack. And why was it botched? Because neighbors overheard all this crazy commotion and the cops get there and they find Devin and arrest him. They also find Devin's friend Darius near the scene, but he plays dumb and they actually initially let him go. But after learning he was a full-on accomplice, they arrest him at the airport, literally on the plane, boarded, ready to fly back to Canada. Luckily, the woman and her boyfriend survived, but the boyfriend did have some pretty serious injuries. Anyway, these two prizes are being held in California on millions of dollars in bail. They're pleading not guilty, so we'll see how that works out.
This woman was murdered by pirates and then fed to piranhas while she was solo traveling. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the horrifying murder of Emma Kelty. 43-year-old Emma was a head teacher from Surbiton in southwest London. After the heartbreaking death of her father, Emma decided that she wanted to go and live life to the fullest. She sold her flat, she quit her job, and decided to go out solo traveling. Emma was already a very experienced solo traveler. She had already been to the South Pole, where she was the 6th woman to ever ski there alone. She had spent over 50 days by herself in Antarctica, and she had hiked over 2,500 miles across North America. Emma decided that her next challenge was that she was going to kayak all the way along the Amazon River, which is over 4,000 miles long. On the 15th of June 2017, Emma flew to Peru to begin her journey, which she documented well across her blog, Instagram, and Twitter account. And Emma would go on to tweet some of the scary things that she experienced, including a woman holding a child while waving a machete at her, coming across a group of men in boats, all of which were armed with arrows, and a time where she was sat for over 2 hours waiting to undress out of some wet clothes, but she couldn't because some men had parked up next to her and were just sat lingering watching her. She tweeted about her lack of sleep, that people would come up to her tent and shine torches to her, and eerily, one of the final things that she tweeted was a warning that she received from some locals. The next leg of her journey was an incredibly dangerous one, and the locals had warned her that she would either get her boat stolen from her or that she would be killed. The 12th of September, Emma would pitch her tent nearby the remote quarry. As she was sat inside of her tent, she would be spotted by a gang of 5 men who were named the Water Pirates. These men were aged between their late teens up to their 20s. Upon seeing Emma's tent, the Water Pirates believed that she was actually a Colombian person who was smuggling drugs and they wanted to steal it, so they began to shoot into the tent. Emma would be struck in the arm and she came out of her tent waving her arms, showing that she wasn't a threat and crying out for help. The men would pounce on Emma, threatening her and demanding her to hand over the drugs that she didn't even have. They would abduct Emma, forcing her against her will into their boat, which was confirmed as some locals saw her inside of their boat. The gang would go on to brutally and repeatedly rape Emma. They tortured her, cutting off her hair using a knife, and even attempted to behead her, slitting her throat and cutting at her shoulder. Before being thrown into the Amazon River, profusely bleeding, which would attract the piranhas, Emma would be fatally shot in the head. The pirates had actually stolen several of Emma's electronic devices, including her GPS device, and while fiddling around with it, one of the pirates accidentally set off the SOS signal, which would lead the police directly to them once they began to search for Emma. Brazilian police, alongside the Brazilian Navy, would be able to recover some of Emma's belongings, including her tent, but sadly, to this day, Emma's body has never been found. The full gang of pirates would eventually be tracked down, and the main perpetrator, the man who allegedly shot Emma, was actually already murdered by a rival gang by the time the police came to find him. 3 of the other members would be incarcerated, although I couldn't find any information about their sentences. And finally, one of the pirates who had been on the run since 2017 was actually apprehended only last year after he took his daughter to hospital. He would be arrested and charged with murder and handed a sentence of 29 years and 11 months to serve.
This is a real sign in a city called Davao in the Philippines, and there's a lot of history behind it. Now, as you can see in the sign, it says, "Waving children, please wave back," with a pair of children with their arms up. This sign serves as a warning to everyone passing by that there are ghosts of children in the area. It's believed there's a ton of supernatural activity all around the area, and if you don't wave back, these children will come and haunt you. Upon researching this story, I haven't found anyone reporting that they haven't waved back to any of the children. I've only heard accounts of people waving back and then being okay afterwards. So with that information in my head, I can only assume the worst happens if you don't wave back. So obviously, if you're traveling in the Philippines and you see a child wave to you, wave back for your own safety. The last thing you want is a ghost child following you and haunting you for the rest of your life. Let me know what you guys think about this. I also covered a video on the Aswang, which is another Filipino urban legend. Very scary stuff. Definitely go check that out. And if you have any suggestions, let me know.